We often picture Vikings with axes and longships charging into battle. That's the Hollywood version. But the real story, the one that truly matters for survival, is found in the quiet moments. It's found in the engineering they used to stay alive through brutal Scandinavian winters. Forget the myths for a moment. We are going on a journey to uncover a forgotten piece of survival science. This isn't about legends. It is about the real, practical skills that allowed these tough people to thrive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. It's a story of cleverness, strength, and a deep understanding of the natural world. This is the stuff that truly keeps you alive when everything is on the line. The greatest battles the Vikings fought were not always against other warriors. Their biggest enemy was often the cold, a relentless, biting cold that could freeze a person solid. Surviving this required more than just a thick cloak and a strong will. It required cleverness. It demanded a system that could work day and night, even when resources were scarce. What we're exploring is a piece of technology so simple, yet so effective, that it stands as a testament to human cleverness. This is the kind of knowledge that gets passed down because it works. It's the difference between waking up to a new day or giving in to the unforgiving grip of winter. This forgotten history is a treasure map for modern survival. It shows us that you don't always need complex gadgets or high-tech gear to overcome incredible challenges. Sometimes, the most powerful tools are knowledge and a keen observation of your surroundings. The Vikings didn't have instruction manuals or online tutorials. They learned by doing, by testing, and by understanding the basic rules of nature. They were the original survival engineers, and their longhouses were masterpieces of practical design. Every beam, every stone, and every handful of earth had a purpose, and that purpose was, first and foremost, to keep their families alive and well through the long, dark nights. So, let's peel back the layers of time. Let's step inside one of these smoky, timber-framed halls and look closer. We are not just looking at an ancient home. We are looking at a survival machine, a machine powered by fire, stone, and an incredible understanding of physics. This is where the real Viking story unfolds, not on the battlefield, but around the hearth. It's a story of how a community used the power of the earth itself to create warmth and life in a world of ice and snow. This is the kind of raw, effective survival skill that gets my blood pumping. It's real, it's tough, and it works. Inside, every Viking longhouse was a central fire pit, known as a long fire or langeld. This wasn't just a place for cooking or a fancy centerpiece, it was the beating heart of the entire settlement. In a land where the sun could disappear for months, this fire was the source of light, warmth, and community. But a simple open fire has a major flaw. It burns hot and fast using huge amounts of precious firewood. As soon as the flames die down, the cold rushes back in. The Vikings knew this. They understood that keeping their families from freezing to death required more than just constantly feeding a fire. It required a system. This system was an absolute survival necessity. For the Vikings, warmth was not a luxury. It was the line between life and death. In the brutal northern climates, getting too cold was a constant threat, especially for the young and the old. A reliable source of heat was essential for staying healthy, for drying wet clothes to prevent sickness, and for keeping spirits high during the long, dark winters. The fire pit was the engine of their survival, but the real genius was in how they managed its energy. They needed a way to capture the heat and make it last, turning a temporary blaze into a steady, long-lasting source of warmth. The design of their heating system was deliberate and incredibly practical. It was built to solve a very real problem: how to stay warm through the night without burning all your fuel in a few hours. A simple fire loses most of its heat straight up through the roof. It's incredibly wasteful. The Vikings couldn't afford to waste a single branch. Their solution was to build a thermal battery right into the heart of their home. This wasn't just a pile of rocks, it was a carefully built structure designed to soak up energy, and then slowly, gently release it back into the living space, long after the flames had turned to embers. This clever approach changed the longhouse from a simple shelter into a functional survival home. The heat system was a part of the daily rhythm of life. The fire would be stoked for cooking and social gatherings in the evening, and all that intense energy would be absorbed by the surrounding materials. Then, as the family slept, the stored heat would spread outwards, creating a stable, warm environment that lasted until morning. It was a silent, tireless guardian against the cold. It shows that the Vikings weren't just warriors, they were masters of living smartly, using clever engineering to conquer their environment. The secret behind the Vikings' incredible heating system is a scientific principle we call thermal mass. It sounds complicated, but it's actually beautifully simple. Think of it like a sponge, but for heat instead of water. Certain materials like stone, clay, and dense earth are very good at absorbing and holding on to heat energy. They have high thermal mass. Wood and air, on the other hand, have low thermal mass. They heat up quickly but also cool down just as fast. The Vikings naturally understood this difference and used it to their ultimate advantage in their battle for survival. Here's how it works in practice. When you have a big fire, it releases a massive amount of energy. Most of that energy, in the form of heat, just escapes and disappears. But if you surround that fire with materials that have a high thermal mass, like a bed of large, dense river stones or a thick clay hearth, those materials will slowly soak up the heat. They act like a battery, charging up with heat energy. It takes a long time for these dense materials to get fully charged, but once they are, they hold that energy for an incredibly long time, which is key for survival. The real magic happens when the fire starts to die down. As the air in the longhouse begins to cool, the charged-up stones and clay begin to do their work. They start to release the stored heat back into the room. But they don't release it all at once. They spread it slowly and steadily over many hours. This creates a gentle, steady warmth that keeps the living space comfortable long after the last log is burned to ash. It's like having a radiator that doesn't need any electricity or constant fuel. It's a passive heating system, powered by the initial burst of a strong fire. This principle was the foundation of the Vikings' winter survival strategy. It allowed them to get the most benefit from every piece of wood they burned. In a place where resources were scarce, this efficiency was everything. They couldn't afford to waste fuel. By using thermal mass, they turned their central fire pit into a slow-release heat source that worked for them while they slept. It's a brilliant example of using the properties of natural materials to create a highly effective piece of survival technology. No moving parts, no complicated mechanics, just a deep understanding of the earth and its elements. This isn't just a theory, it's a story told by the earth itself. Archaeologists digging at Viking-age sites all across Scandinavia, from Norway to Iceland and Greenland, have uncovered the physical proof of these clever heating systems. When they dig up the remains of a longhouse, they almost always find a long, centrally located pit or raised hearth. But, it's what's inside and around these fire pits that confirms the use of thermal mass. They are not just simple holes in the ground. They are carefully built features, providing a clear blueprint of Viking engineering. In many sites, these central hearths are filled with layers of fire-cracked stones. These aren't just random rocks. They are often dense, water-worn stones chosen from riverbeds, stones with a high capacity to hold heat. The repeated heating and cooling cause them to crack over time, leaving behind a clear signature for archaeologists to find 1,000 years later. Around the hearth, excavators often find thick layers of packed clay and earth, forming a solid insulated base. This base acted as another layer of the thermal battery, preventing heat from being lost into the cold ground below, and instead sending it upwards and outwards into the room. The evidence varies slightly from region to region, which shows how the Vikings changed their techniques to fit the local environment. In Iceland, where timber was extremely scarce, Hanningstarnik stegi drygger jordin krandan med rowan angerhan. Chuths are often even stronger, with thick stone walls and turf-lined pits to get the most heat from burning peat or precious driftwood. At L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, the Viking settlement in North America, the hearths show a similar design, proving that this was a core piece of their survival knowledge that they carried with them across the stormy Atlantic. The evidence is literally set in stone. These archaeological findings paint a clear picture of daily life. We can see how the entire longhouse was designed around this heating system. The sleeping platforms were often arranged along the walls, allowing people to benefit from the radiating heat throughout the night. The smoke from the fire would be channeled out through a simple hole in the roof, but the precious heat was trapped and stored in the stone and clay mass below. It's a powerful reminder that these were not primitive people. They were expert engineers, and the ground beneath our feet holds the proof of their incredible survival skills. So, how did this Viking radiator work on a daily basis? It was a simple but powerful routine, a rhythm of life set by the cold. The process began with selecting the right materials. The Vikings would have chosen their stones carefully. They needed dense solid rocks, like granite or soapstone, if available, that wouldn't shatter easily. porous or wet stones could explode when heated, so knowledge of geology was a basic survival skill. These chosen stones, the core of the thermal battery, would be placed in and around the central fire pit, sometimes forming a raised hearth or a thick bed beneath the flames. The next step was charging the stones. This was done during the most active parts of the day. In the evening, when the family gathered, the fire would be built up high. This was the time for cooking the evening meal, telling stories, and fixing tools. All the while, the intense heat from the roaring fire was being steadily absorbed by the massive stones and the surrounding clay floor. This charging process might take a few hours, with the stones becoming incredibly hot to the touch. The Vikings were essentially pouring energy into their thermal bank, storing up warmth for the long, cold hours ahead. Once the stones were fully charged and the evening activities were over, the fire would be allowed to die down to smoldering embers. This was the crucial moment when the system switched from absorbing heat to releasing it. As the temperature in the longhouse began to drop, the superheated stones would begin to radiate their stored energy. This wasn't a harsh, direct heat like an open flame, but a gentle, widespread warmth that spread throughout the entire living space. The placement of the hearth in the center of the longhouse was key, as it allowed the heat to spread evenly in all directions, warming the entire hall. This slow release of heat was the ultimate goal. The system ensured that even with no active fire, a basic level of warmth was maintained through the coldest part of the night. It prevented the temperature from dropping to dangerous levels, protecting the inhabitants from getting too cold and frostbite. It was an incredibly efficient use of fuel. Instead of burning wood all night long, they used a large fire for a short period to power their stone radiator for 8 to 10 hours. It's a perfect example of working smarter, not harder, a core principle of all good survival. This was ancient engineering at its most effective. This ancient Viking knowledge is not just a historical curiosity, it is a timeless survival principle that is still incredibly useful today. Look at any well-designed off-grid cabin or remote wilderness shelter, and you will often find the same idea at work. Modern survivalists and homesteaders build what are called rocket mass heaters, which use a similar principle. They burn wood in a super-hot, efficient burning chamber and send the heat through a long, winding pipe made of stone, cob, or brick. This mass absorbs the heat and then radiates it into the room for hours, just like the Viking hearth. This wisdom is also found in military fieldcraft. When soldiers need to create a survival shelter in a cold environment, they often build a fire near a large rock face or build a reflector wall of stone or earth. The rock wall absorbs the heat from the fire and radiates it back into their shelter throughout the night. This simple technique, which uses the natural environment as a thermal battery, can be the difference between a night you can survive and a deadly one. It's the Viking principle in action. Use a short, hot fire to charge up a thermal mass that will keep you warm long after the flames are gone. The idea even extends to gardening. In cold climates, gardeners sometimes use heat sink principles to protect their plants from frost. A stone wall or a path of dark paving stones will absorb the sun's heat during the day and slowly release it at night, creating a warmer small area that can extend the growing season. This is exactly what the Vikings were doing inside their homes, but on a smaller scale. They are all using the same basic rule of physics. Dense materials store heat and release it slowly. It's a natural, powerful, and free source of energy management. Ultimately, the Viking heat hack is a powerful lesson in human cleverness. It reminds us that the most effective solutions are often the simplest. In a world obsessed with complex technology, there is incredible power in understanding the basic rules of the natural world. The Vikings didn't have digital thermostats or electric heaters, but they had something more valuable: knowledge passed down through generations. They knew how to work with stone, earth, and fire to create a safe, warm home in the face of brutal conditions. The echoes of their survival engineering can still teach us how to be more strong, more efficient, and more connected to the world around us. That is a skill that will never go out of style.